The Telugu Komati Chettis had been trading in Madras for a long time and were pretty good at it, holding privileged positions with the British in the pre-independence days.
They are the stalwart guardians of the new India, that infant but eager republic so strongly dedicated to the cause of freedom.
Well located in the Paris corner and Broadway environment of Old Madras. The Kotwal market of the Kotachiwadi was something which owes its origins to them. But there was one unsavory character among them, Alavandar. He was a salesman who traded in pens, plastic goods and saris. But he wasn't a good man. In spite of being married with 2 children, he was a womanizer, often preying on young women. Towards the end of 1951, Alavandar met a young girl of 22, Devaki Menon, who visited the shop he worked in called Gem & Co. to buy a fountain pen. Fountain pens held great value those days and were treasured by everyone. In this particular case, that pen sale began an amorous affair between Alavandar and Devaki, which eventually resulted in death. On 29 August 1952, Inspector Ramanta Iyer was approached by a worried-looking woman, and along with her was a well-known businessman in Madras, a big dealer in fountain pens and the owner of the noted firm Gem & Company, M.C. Kunnan Chetty. Their complaint? The woman's husband, who was also Mr. Chetty's employee, Alavandar, was missing. The noted Madras morning daily, The Hindu, carried a short news item the next day. It had a sensational headline that caught the reader's attention at once. City businessman missing. Who was Alavandar? During World War II, he worked as a sub-divisional officer at the army headquarters in Avadi near Madras. He belonged to the Hindu Vyasa community, to which MC Kunnan also belonged. After his discharge from the British Indian Army service, he looked around for a living and chose to have a small business of his own, plastic goods. The age of plastics had just dawned in India soon after World War II and caught the fancy of the Indian consumer. The articles were colorful, light, and not so expensive. Plastic articles became the fashion of the day, and Alavandar believed it was a good line of business. His fellow Vyasa, Kunnan Chetty, supported him and gave him a small space in the front of his pen company for him to display the goods and conduct his business. Gem & Company drew many customers, and it seemed a fine venue of business for the novelty of the day. Along with plastics, Alavandar also had another line of business, selling saris on installments. The installment business was something new in Madras during that period. With its easy terms of payment and possession of the goods, it found ready acceptance among the public. Even though selling on investments was forward-thinking of Alavandar and even found its place in the economy of the country and the world, he did it for the wrong reasons. Alavandar introduced installment payments mainly to get close to women. His customers were mostly nurses, students staying in hostels, spinsters, working women, and housewives. When his clients failed to pay the installments, he insisted on payment in kind, and many were actually willing to agree to his terms. He took the women to a lodge on Broadway, which was close to his place of work, and registered under a fake name and address. Whenever I went to YMCA to play table tennis, I would see him there. He would walk in wearing a bow tie and with a girl in tow. He sold plastic goods from a portion at Gem & Company. He was not interested in business, only in women. He also sold saris on installments just to connect with them. Film historian and writer Rando Guy said about Alavandar. Alavandar used perfume liberally, and every time he took a woman out for a cup of coffee, he doused himself all over. He believed himself to be a stud, boasting that he had slept with more than 400 women of all communities of India. The dedication he had towards being such a stud is shown in the fact that he had undergone circumcision for it. There is a mistaken, unscientific belief that circumcision improves the prowess of a man. Medically, it is incorrect. Alavandar's circumcision played a minor but significant role in the murder, baffling forensic scientists and cops. During the 1970s, MC Kunnan Chetty, when interviewed about this case, was most reluctant to speak about it. He just said, "I told that fellow to concentrate on his business instead of chasing women. He did not listen. He got what he deserved, I suppose." Adding to his philandering, Alavandar was also an opium addict. This addiction came from the belief that opium is an aphrodisiac. However, according to his doctor, Alavandar took opium to relieve him of the frequent attacks of asthma. The truth must lie somewhere in between. Through the whole night of 28th August 1952, Mrs. Alavandar waited for her husband at home, and as he did not return even the next day, she went to Gem and Company, where Alavandar worked, and made inquiries. The pen company staff told her that her husband had gone to meet a friend in Royapuram, and he did not return to the shop afterwards. Who did he go to meet? A woman, obviously, Devaki Menon. Devaki, a native of Palakkad, Kerala, on the west coast of India, is an attractive young woman. College educated, she lived in Madras and involved herself in social service. In mid-1951, Devaki, then young and single, engaged in Hindi prachar work. For this purpose, she came to Gem and Company to buy a fountain pen. There she met Alavandar and the two became friends. By October that year, Alavandar took her to a lodge in Georgetown and slept with her. To the playboy, Devaki was just one more point on his scoreboard. After a few months of dating, she found out about Alavandar's drug addiction and how much of a womanizer he really was. By the end of that year, Devaki broke off her relationship with Alavandar and got married to Prabhakara Menon. Not able to withstand rejection, even after Devaki's marriage, Alavandar harassed her and visited her often, even though she clearly told him that she was not interested. One day, after their marriage, Prabhakara Menon and Devaki went to Gem and Company. Alavandar congratulated Prabhakara for marrying the lovely young woman. The way Alavandar behaved intimately with Devaki sowed seeds of doubt in Prabhakara's mind about the fidelity of his wife. The suspicion grew in the mind of the doubting Prabhakara. A few days later, the couple went for a late-night show at the popular cinema Minerva in the Broadway area. During the show, Devaki confessed to her husband about her intimacy with Alavandar and said the womanizer was stalking her again, harassing and begging her to renew their relationship. On 28th August 1952, Devaki visited Gem & Co. and met Alavandar. She then invited him to her home in the evening and then she left alone. That afternoon, Alavandar came to Devaki's house at Royapuram by rickshaw with high hopes, since Devaki had told him that her husband would be away from home. Many people in the neighborhood, including the owner of the shop hiring out bicycles near Devaki's house, saw Alavandar going up the steps and knocking on the door. But nobody saw him coming out of that house. 29th August 1952. The Indo-Ceylon Express train, now known as Rameshwaram Express, left the Egmore railway station at Madras the previous night and steamed into the Manmadurai junction down south on its way to Dhanushkodi on the Bay of Bengal. During the journey to Manmadurai, passengers aboard the train complained about a bad odor coming from under a seat. A steel trunk seemed to be the source of the stink. They also noticed stains of some foul-smelling fluid that had oozed out of the metal box. The passengers asked around, but the box had no claimants. At last, a complaint was made to the railway police and the compartment was detained at Manmadurai. The local cops took the box onto the platform and opened it in the presence of different passengers. The contents shocked the small town cops. The steel box contained a naked and decapitated corpse of a man. The cops noticed that the decapitated man had green socks on his feet and his penis was circumcised. There was also a thick thread around his waist. The Manmadurai cops sent the dead body to the district headquarters at Madurai for a post-mortem. The first autopsy wrongfully concluded that the corpse belonged to a man of 25 years of age. The doctor who performed the autopsy came to this conclusion based on the fusion of the two bones at the lower back that normally took place around 25. This was later corrected at the second post-mortem done at Madras. There were other wrong conclusions arrived at by the small town cops. The circumcision and the presence of green socks on the corpse's feet misled them to think that the body belonged to a Muslim. Muslim males, like Jews, are obligated under their religion to undergo circumcision, and green is considered the favorite color of Muslims. Both conclusions, however, proved to be wrong. The body had a thick thread around the waist. This was usually worn by Hindu males in the bygone days. It was intended to hold the loincloth in its place. The custom has almost vanished today. It is a wonder how the corpse overlooked the presence of the thread and decided that the corpse was that of a Muslim. During the same time, Alavandar's wife was directed to Devaki's house in her search for her husband, as the other staff members in Gemenko had seen Alavandar leave the shop around noon soon after Devaki came and met with him. When Alavandar's wife knocked on Devaki's door, Prabhakara Menon, Devaki's husband, answered it. He told her that her husband never came to his house and he had not seen him. Alavandar's wife began to worry even more after this, and this led her to requesting Kunan Chetty, the owner of Gemenko, to file a missing persons report with the police. Acting on the filed complaint, a police officer bicycled to Royapuram, where a surprise awaited him. There was a lock on Devaki's door. The police officer made inquiries and found that the couple had left for Mumbai. After learning about this disturbing information, the policeman began cycling his way back to the station. As he cycled in Royapuram, the road took a curve that was close to the sea, and while he was riding on that stretch of the road, a curious sight attracted his attention. He saw a packet bobbing up and down in the sea, being pushed by the rising sea waves towards the sandy shore. His curiosity fully lit, the cop went up to the sands and picked up the package wrapped in a brown shirt. The cop was astonished when he saw what was inside. A human head. The head had been buried in a shallow pit in the sea, and the tide had brought it up and washed it ashore. The discovery of the head made headline news in the press, and the city sat up with alarm. The severed head was sent to the Madras Medical College Forensic Department for analysis. Dr. C.B. Gopalakrishna, then the assistant professor of forensic medicine, performed the postmortem. The headless corpse, which was at Madurai, was also brought to Madras and handed over to him. Dr. C.B. Gopalakrishna was one of the authorities in forensic medicine in India. Dr. Gopalakrishna set to work on the corpse and head. The head was slightly decomposed and revealed a deep cut, the apparent result of an attack with a sharp weapon like a knife. The head had been severed at the cervical vertebra. A bone had been cut obliquely and even a piece was missing. 2 teeth had peculiar formation, overriding one on another. The right earlobe was pierced in 2 places, while the left had only one. Mrs. Alavandar was called to the mortuary and she identified the head as that of her husband's. Besides, she identified the teeth too as her husband's. The examination of the corpse revealed that the person was between 42 and 45. Alavandar was 42. When the head and trunk were placed together, the 2 parts fit perfectly. Dr. Gopalakrishna was then able to come to the inescapable conclusion that they were of the same body. However, he wished to prove that the body was Alavandar's beyond all doubt. The records at the Avadi Army headquarters gave the final answer: fingerprints. The army records had the dead man's fingerprints and the 2 sets matched. No doubt, the body was Alavandar's. As the next course of action, the police met with Devaki's neighbors. Many had seen Alavandar going up the steps and knocking on Devaki's door, but nobody saw him leaving the house. The police didn't have to describe Alavandar too much, as he was a familiar figure in that neighborhood. He was quite a frequent visitor to Devaki's house. Now the couple, Devaki and Prabhakara, had vanished from Madras and gone away to Mumbai. The city cops put 2 and 2 together. The scene now shifted to Mumbai. The Madras city cops travelled all the way to Mumbai, and with the help of the Mumbai police, they traced the relatives with whom the Menons were staying. Devaki, having undergone an abortion, was resting at home. Prabhakara had gone out and the cops traced him to the famed Chowpatty beach. Here the Madras cops spoke to him. As they were questioning him, one of them noticed a pen in his pocket, and he took it out. It bore the initials of Alavandar. The cops also noticed that Prabhakara had shaved off his mustache to avoid identification, but the clean-shaven face did not fool the smart Madras city cops. When they questioned him about Alavandar, Prabhakara tried to run away, but the Mumbai cops lay in wait for him and they grabbed him easily. Devaki and Prabhakara Menon were taken into custody. A Mumbai city magistrate remanded them to custody. Both were charged with the murder of Alavandar and other connected charges, and then were brought to Madras. Their arrest created a sensation in the city and state, and newspapers went to town in covering the murder and its aftermath. With the now infamous couple in prison, the Madras City Police began to investigate the case in order to gather the necessary evidence to support the prosecution at trial. A team of top police officials worked on the case, assisted by forensic scientist Dr. N. Pichandi, and Dr. C.B. Gopalakrishna. Dr. Pichandi visited Devaki's house. It was the upstairs portion of an isolated house in a lonely side lane. The forensic specialist was accompanied by the city police staff photographer Babu Kumareshan. The two went around the upstairs residence with a fine-tooth comb. Babu took numerous photographs, one of which was a blood-stained imprint of a human palm on the kitchen wall. This would later be identified as the handprint left by Prabhakara Menon. Also in the residence were drops of water under an old-fashioned stone grinder. When it was lifted, water was found. It was reddish in color. Pichandi conducted a chemical test on it and found that the stains contained human blood. Meanwhile, the Madras city policemen had enough cause to pat themselves on their backs for the fine detective work done in nabbing the culprits and the finding of the body with all the sensations surrounding the case and the intense press coverage. The top bosses were understandably eager to get the maximum punishment for at least the main accused, Prabhakara Menon. The police attempted to make a deal with Devaki Menon. She would be given a state's pardon for her role in the murder if she would go into the witness box and give evidence against her husband. As there were no eyewitnesses to Alavandar's murder, the police felt compelled to make such an offer to guarantee Prabhakara's conviction. But Devaki, like a true partner, flatly turned down the offer. She said that her husband killed to save her wifely honor, and she would not let down such a fine and protective husband. She then related what happened in the house to the cops. On August 28, 1952, Devaki Menon called Alavandar home, and as he was obsessed with her, he readily agreed. He came home and knocked at their door. As soon as Alavandar stepped inside the house and closed the door, he started physically molesting Devaki, trying to undress the unwilling woman. Prabhakara Menon, who was in the kitchen, rushed out with a Malabar knife in hand and, enraged with what he saw, killed Alavandar by stabbing him. Prabhakara then cut off Alavandar's head using the lethal knife. The couple packed the murdered man's headless torso into a steel trunk. Prabhakara transported the steel trunk to Madras Central Railway Station. On his way to the Egmore railway station, he threw the murder weapon, the Malabar knife, in a park on Broadway, Madras. Then, with the help of an unsuspecting porter, Prabhakara placed the steel trunk under a seat in a third-class compartment of the Indo-Ceylon Express. Once he returned home from the railway station, Prabhakara wrapped the severed head in Alavandar's own shirt, carried it to the Royapuram beach, and buried it in the sand. Interestingly, Prabhakara denied it all in his statement to the police. He said that he had nothing to do with the death of Alavandar. When the cops interrogated the servant boy that lived in the same house with the Menons, he told the cops that at night, the husband and wife would discuss Alavandar and their plans to get rid of him. He would lie on the floor near the bedroom and listen to their talks and plans of conspiracy. He had also heard Devaki sobbing sometimes. According to the boy, Prabhakara had pestered and pressured his wife to bring Alavandar to their house, and he would then do the rest. On the day of the murder, Prabhakara had given the boy some spending money and asked him to go around the city and enjoy its sights. The boy was new to Madras and felt delighted that he had a kind boss. The auto rickshaw driver who dropped Alavandar at Devaki's house that ill-fated day was traced. His statement became a strong link to prove that the murdered man was last seen alive entering the woman's house. The city cops also traced the porter at the Egmore railway station who carried the steel box with its grisly contents, about which the poor man was blissfully unaware. He identified Prabhakara from the photograph and later on in the court during the trial. The police also traced some more material objects to strengthen the case. The blood-stained sari worn by Devaki at the time of the murder. According to the police, Prabhakara had thrown it in a park in Broadway on his way to Egmore railway station. The park attendant found it and he had given it to his mistress, from whom the police recovered it. A knife known as Malabar knife was also recovered. It was alleged to have been used to dismember Alavandar's body. The shop where it was bought by Prabhakara on the morning of the murder was also traced. The accused retained B.T. Sundararajan and S. Krishnamurthy to defend them. Both were barristers. Mr. Sundararajan was one of the top criminal trial lawyers of his day. The trial was presided over by Mr. Justice A.S.P. Iyer, sitting in full legal regalia of the day with crimson robes and the white wig. At the Madras High Court, there was a special court hall known as the Fourth Court, reserved for the hearing of criminal session cases. The dock in which the accused stood with the police guard had a concealed door on the floor. Through the door, the accused was brought in and taken away after the hearing each day by armed security cops. Trial by jury was then in force, and a panel of 9 jurors was sworn in to decide on matters of fact. It consisted of some of the most noted citizens of Madras. S. Govind Swaminathan, then the state prosecutor, handled the prosecution case while B.T. Sundararajan and S. Krishnamurthy appeared for the 2 accused. The 2 pleaded not guilty to the various charges, including murder. The learned state prosecutor built up a strong case of planned murder of Alavandar by the 2 accused. It was a case of the husband getting rid of his wife's lover, the outburst of the most primitive emotion of them all. He compared the primitive male killing to the killing of the serpent which has strayed into his garden. An emotionally charged silence filled the court hall when Mrs. Alavandar came to the witness stand. She burst into loud sobs when a glass case containing the severed head of her husband was brought into court. The prosecutor then asked her to identify the head. Amidst rocking sobs, she pointed at the overriding teeth and the pierced earlobes and confirmed that it was her husband's. Then the counsel for the accused, the Menons, spoke. They raised the plea that the killing resulted by the sudden and grave provocation incited by the playboy Alavandar trying to pressure Prabhakara's wife Devaki to have sex with him against her will. The defense's version was that Alavandar had come home and made forceful overtures to Devaki, and he was pulling at her clothes. Prabhakara, who was in the kitchen cutting vegetables, rushed out with the knife in hand and was enraged by the distressing and degrading sight. Provoked, he attacked the villain and the 2 started fighting. Prabhakara had the kitchen knife in his hand, and during the fight, the knife had accidentally struck Alavandar. The counsel submitted to the jury and judge that there was no intention to commit the murder. Under the Indian Penal Code, sudden and grave provocation is a fitting answer to charge of murder. The defense tried hard to take advantage of this exception, but they did not succeed. The reason was the medical evidence. Dr. C.V. Gopalakrishna, forensic scientist, went into the witness box as the main prosecution witness. Besides proving that the head and trunk belonged to the same person, he spoke on oath about the cause of his death. The victim's left lung and liver had been torn by a knife which had been used with a downward thrust in a right trajectory. It was this injury which had caused the death. The nature of the injury did not tally with the defense's version of grappling and struggling. The stabbing had been done with a sharp knife using considerable force with a view to cause irreparable damage. There was no accidental injury, it was a cold-blooded attack. The noted forensic science specialist said, even though the prosecution put up a strong case against the accused, there was one factor which played a major role in the outcome of the case. Mr. Justice A.S.P. Iyer. In the judge's opinion, Alavandar was a scamp and a blot on society. Such persons deserve to be eliminated. According to Justice Iyer's daughter, Mrs. Asokam Ishwaran, her father described the murder as justifiable execution of an unwanted rascal. The judge's summing up to the jury tilted in the favor of the accused. He supported the sudden and grave provocation theory put forward by the defense. Despite the judge's summation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty against both the accused. Accepting the verdict, His Lordship sentenced Prabhakara Menon to 7 years in jail and Devaki to 3. The police top brass were disappointed as they expected Prabhakara to hang for the gruesome murder. But the learned judge took a different view of the case and murder and viewed it all in the large perspective of the interests of society and its morals. Prabhakara wished to appeal against the sentence, but his defense, B.T. Sundararajan, rightly advised him not to take such a faulty step. He told his client that he had escaped the light sentence thanks to the judge. If any other judge had heard the case, he would have got a very stiff sentence. If he appealed, the state would go on appeal too for enhancement of the sentence, and it stood a good chance of winning. Prabhakara understood and did not appeal. The Menons disappeared inside a state prison and came out after just a few years due to good behavior. They were released during the mid-1950s. Later, after their release, they relocated to Palakkad, where they set up a tea shop. Over the years, they prospered and turned their small tea shop into a big hotel. It's been more than 7 decades, and Alavandar has achieved immortality in the social history of South India, though for the wrong reasons.